Greg Wrubell, voice of BYU. We've loved the time we've had him on since the fall when all of crazy started, when they were a part of the announcement of joining the Big 12, and we've had him on many times. Love the coverage of BYU. And now this week, Greg, my goodness. So how much different, the coaches, you try to do it differently, but how much different is it BYU Utah week?
Well, they haven't played regularly for a long, long time. And now they're back and doing it in a league. I think that's an important facet of this, is that this game will mean annually a lot more based on what it means to the standings and postseason implications. And this year, ironically, we have such a reversal of fortune, right? In the preseason, Utah was picked number 1, and BYU's picked 13th. Check the standings today. BYU's number 1, and Utah is, you guessed it, 13th. Yep. So an exact role reversal in this. So it won't mean as much as it might in other years when the two teams are contending. This game means a lot more to BYU than Utah, clearly. For Utah, this might kind of salvage the season and help them kind of resurrect things late, help get them to a bowl game. They're still 2 wins away in a pretty tough closing stretch. So Utah's playing for that. But they've got under the surface issues to deal with first and trying to find a starting quarterback for this game, let alone going out to win this game and slow down BYU. But for the Cougs, I mean, it's all out. Like, Utah's just the next team you got to beat. As we saw in the CFP rankings last night, 8-0 is not getting BYU the kind of respect you'd think it might get, with 2 of those wins being against teams in the CFP rankings, SMU on the road and K-State in a blowout. And yet there's a 3-spot separation between BYU and 1-loss Boise State. That tells you all you need to know. And it sets up BYU's marching orders quite obviously. BYU's got to go out, win, probably win big on some weeks, and show some style points. And so, yeah, it's always important to beat Utah. But this year, more than any other, Utah's just another game. You got to win to get to where you want to be. Because right now, it looks like the objective has to be win out. Based on what we saw last night from the CFP, it looks like BYU's got to win out to get where they want to go. You'd like to think that a 12-1 Big 12 team would be ranked better than, say, a 12-1 G6 team like Boise. But I don't want to bet that after what I saw last night. So, yeah, big game, huge game, holy war, call it what you will. It's a big deal. But it's ever more than ever, focus on the next opponent and move on.
Greg, this game because it's a rivalry game, the normal rules kind of get thrown out the window a bit. I think on the surface, if you look at the reason you're talking about that, reversal of fortune is because Utah has not had consistent quarterback play. BYU has had some of the most in the entire conference, if not the country, and Jake Retzlaff. So, but this is a game where nerves happen. Is that the biggest concern outside of a defense that's still pretty tough for Utah?
Yeah, defense is always going to be good, and it is good again for Utah. The offense has just not had it this year, and that's where the biggest difference lies right now. But, yeah, there have been a lot of games where it becomes an outlier game, and a team that was playing a certain way going in, it's usually BYU doesn't play the way it had been coming out of it. And more than anything else, it's been the sudden change plays in this rivalry. First, I want to underscore this point. Since BYU last won in a blowout fashion against Utah, by the way, that was 1996. So BYU won 37-17 back in 1996. Since that game, BYU's not beaten Utah by double digits. And since that game, there have been 23 meetings, and 19 have been decided by single digits. So Utah's had the rare blowouts when they've happened. But for the most part, 19 of 23 are single-digit games. 18 of the 23 are one-score games, meaning 8 points or fewer. So in those tight games, it most often comes down to who squandered a possession and who got an extra one, which brings us to the turnover number. Check this. During Utah's recent 9-game win streak over BYU, by the way, BYU broke that streak back in 2021. During the 9-game Utah win streak, BYU had 29 giveaways to Utah's 14. Okay, so a better than 2-1 advantage for Utah in terms of turnovers for and against. But more interestingly, of those 29 BYU giveaways, 9 were Utah touchdowns, meaning 9 pick sixes or scoop and scores. BYU, 0 defensive scores off their 14 takeaways. So that's how, in large fashion, Utah was winning those tight games, finding an extra possession and scoring with it in a lot of instances off a BYU giveaway. So in these kinds of games, I don't want to focus on the most obvious thing, but it has been that way in this rivalry. Let's note this. In the last 2 games BYU won in this rivalry, the one before the streak and the one to end the streak, BYU had 0 turnovers, 0 giveaways. It matters.
Greg, a lot has been made about the preseason rankings. You brought those up. We brought those up multiple times as this crazy season's kind of unfolded, and the way that the Big 12 basically voted backwards in some cases. What has has this been a surprise to you? What you've seen from BYU? Like, it's one thing for us out on the outside to say, like, let's put them at 15. We don't really know much about them. But for somebody who's got a front row seat, was this what you were expecting? And what element of this is maybe the most surprising, or what stands out the most for why they are where they are?
Yeah, I don't know that anybody, even in Cougar Nation, goes out and says 8 knows what they were thinking through October. But the reason I wouldn't have thought they'd be the bottom of the barrel this year was because they brought back much of a team that wasn't that far away last year. So people kind of go, well, BYU had a losing record last year. They can't be very good. Well, they were 5-2 at one point last year. They did have that 5-game losing streak, but to end the year. But in those 5 games, we've talked about this, should have beaten Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. If you get either of those, you're probably playing in the postseason. They got neither and did not. So they weren't that far away from a team that brought a lot of those guys back. And those guys had the memory of that 5-game losing streak to motivate them. Then they get to pick 13th, and that motivates them. Then they see Vegas says 4.5 wins over under. That motivates them. And that's what's kind of been driving this team, along with the fact that they've had exceptionally good injury luck. There have been a couple of bumps along the road. For example, you don't lose your starting center and not feel it. BYU lost Connor Pay in the Baylor game. But they've kind of picked up where they left off thanks to Bruce Mitchell, defensive lineman last year, coming in and playing both guard and center and kind of mitigating the loss of Connor Pay. So they've had a couple of hits here and there, but for the most part, the group has been the group. And it's a lot of the same group from last year that did go on the road and beat Arkansas and Fayetteville last year, that did open 3-0, that did start 5-2, that had a couple of Big 12 wins. So they weren't that far away from being good. Now, what takes you from good to great? Well, let's start with Jake Retzloff. His 4 starts last year, they were all losses, but man, he learned a lot under difficult circumstances. And now into this part, he's now started 12 games. He started essentially a season. And when a guy's had a season under his belt, he looks different. He looks better. And that's where Jake is right now. He's a true dual threat, doesn't get enough attention for his running. He finally got passed up by LJ Martin last week, by the way, for the rushing lead on the season. And by the way, the return of LJ is a massive part of this thing as well.
Oh, yeah.
But Jake is really the guy. And he quarterback position is kind of funny because a guy can be 6'4", 220 and have it all apparently, but doesn't give you the numbers. And this guy may not, be the strapping, gargantuan gunslinger, but man, he's a gamer. And he's got the numbers to back it up too. He's a really good quarterback on top of that, but he carries himself in such a way that says, that's the guy I want leading my team. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other, I have to turn to Jay Hill, the defensive coordinator, and say year 2 in this scheme with a great coordinator with the players he's got back, including that big linebacker trio of Blasker, Kelly, and Taggart. That's been a massive part of this. And the secondary being as good as it's been and as impactful as it's been has allowed those front 7 and front 6 guys to really go to work.
Greg, I don't know if I've ever seen a stat line like Darius Lassiter and Chase Roberts have. They both have the same amount of receptions.
Yeah.
They both have the same exact number of touchdowns. They're only separated by Darius Lassiter's massive 7 yards longer of a reception at one point this season. How much does that really help Jake? Because, if they take away one, they're not taking away the other. They are really the same guy on either side of the field.
Yeah, Darius has had 10-plus targets more than Chase. That's the only real differentiator right now is their target to reception percentage. A few more going Darius's way haven't worked out for one way or the other. But, yeah, as you mentioned, they're about basically the same guy right now, a true dynamic duo. And that has, too, been a separating factor for this team. You can't really funnel everything to one guy. They've really got what you see it all the time at the next level of the NFL. But in college, you're often limited to one real superstar wide receiver. And BYU does have 2 in this instance. And I think it's meant the world to BYU, because it also frees up guys like Parker Kingston and JoJo Phillips to go to work elsewhere. And they use a lot of tight ends. They're not a heavy tight end team, but when they throw to them, they tend to score touchdowns. That's happened with Matava Tase, 4 catches, 3 for scores. It's a nice luxury to have, to know that on either side of the field, or when they line up occasionally together, you can look to either guy and expect kind of similar production. A really nice story, the Darius Lassiter, Eastern Michigan transfer coming in, and Chase Roberts has just been a reliable kid since he started as a high school product here in the state of Utah, very near to campus.
Greg, is there anything unique for the BYU side in playing at Salt Lake City?
It's been a while. The unique thing is it's been 6 years. 2018 was the last game up there. So, this is the thing. I mean, I went to school here. That 1996 game, I was the sideline reporter. I've been around this thing a long time. 2001 was my first year calling play-by-play. And at that stage of my career, it was an every year thing, home away, home away. You got used to the rhythm of the rivalry. It's been interrupted since Utah went to the Pac-12, and now it's more sporadic. And so you don't have there are guys on this BYU roster that don't know what it's like to lose to Utah, and certainly don't know what it's like to go play in Salt Lake City. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's a very new experience, which is kind of what they got practice in last year in their first year in the Big 12, is getting new venues and new feelings and new locations. For a lot of these guys, Salt Lake is just another Big 12 venue they haven't been to before because it's been so long.
Greg, the standings, you alluded to them earlier, that they did come out, and BYU was 9, and there can be an argument for that, obviously. But they would be in the top 4 if they win the conference, which they got to keep winning to do that, et cetera. What was the overall reaction among everybody that you're around today in Provo?
Well, let's say they would be 4. They'd be seeded 4th if they win the Big 12 and Boise State's not ranked ahead of BYU or wherever the Big 12. Let's realize that's a possibility.
Yep.
Again, the rule is the byes go to the top 4 highest ranked conference champions. Now, you wouldn't think ever, right, that a Mountain West champ gets ranked ahead of a Big 12 champ. But look at the rankings last night. And it's more possible than you'd like to think. So, but let's for the moment agree that, a Big 12 champ should be no worse than the 4th best conference champ. So, a 4 seed would be the reward. So, but to get there, you can't really slip up. You would like to think you could lose a game, right? Whether it's in Arlington or otherwise, and still have a shot at that. But I thought last night's rankings really cast some doubt on that. I'm not sure if you guys agree or not, but I didn't think the separation was there that needed to be there.
Yep.
A team like BYU, a team like Boise, and having a Kansas State be 19, and Iowa State. When Iowa State popped up at 17, I thought, that's not good. They're saying the second best team in the Big 12 is number 17. And so it kind of turned out the way I thought it might, that they didn't give Big 12, the Big 12 conference, kind of the respect I think it merits. It's a competitive league. It's a week to week, you just don't know kind of league. That's not a bad thing. There's good football being played at the bottom of the league and the top of the league. So, you'd like to believe that the 4 seed is what everyone's playing for here in Arlington. But this committee last night opened some eyes and in a way that cast a lot of doubt on where this league is viewed.
I think we've kind of, we looked at that where Boise was. We said, watch out.
Yeah,
there's not much room for error. Craig.
I think BYU wins out there fine. I don't know how you could, even though they're Boise
lost
if
they
to
win
Oregon.
out. If they win out, I don't think there's any question.
Yeah,
you're gonna, if you win out, you're gonna be ahead of a 1-loss Boise team. But if you're comparing 1-loss teams, last night showed us that there might be more of a discussion than you'd like to think there would be. And what I don't like also is that BYU goes into number 13, right? It's SMU is 13th, right?
Mm-hmm.
They go into SMU and win that game. Hold them to 15 points. Have you seen their point totals this year?
Yeah.
You go into SMU, hold them to 15, and that apparently doesn't carry as much weight as Boise losing by only 3 to Oregon. Okay, we can't start valuing losses over wins, which is I think what's happening here. It's like, Boise, their only loss was to Oregon. We know how good Oregon is. BYU's undefeated. Well, that's pretty cool too. But man, that loss to Oregon shows how good Boise is. Well, no. You can't value losses over wins. What are we doing?
Yeah, and it's the first time that BYU's been a part of this. Of course, back in 2014 when it first started, there was the Baylor-TCU death match all the way down to the end, and we learned a little bit about not getting too high or too low each week because, like, they even used the eye test. That was One of the things Ward Manuel brought up, and next week it might be something different. It's just awesome that they're in the position they are. They have outperformed anything I could have imagined. Happy for Kalani Sitake and also the fan base, and I know this is a huge week, an absolutely big week, even if BYU was 5-4 or whatever they might be.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Where they are right now in the CFP just kind of adds spice to this matchup, and if BYU plays well and beats Utah, maybe there's a market correction next week with the committee when it comes to that. But I know that BYU's not worried about that. They're only worried about beating their rivals, which they haven't done frequently enough over the last couple of decades. And that's what it all comes down to Saturday night. It should be a great atmosphere, late night kick in Salt Lake City. And the most important thing for Kalani right now is beat the rival and then let things shake out next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that as we go down the stretch. But what a cool thing to have the first year of the 12-team playoff. And if you're in Cougar Nation, to have your team in the mix, be good really in the first year of the expanded playoffs. So it's a pretty fun place to be. Yeah, the complaints and quibbles notwithstanding, it's a great place to be. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I know recruiting's going well. And you mentioned one thing that I saw is that they'll talk about quality losses rather than quality wins sometimes. And next week it might be different. So enjoy it while you're in the middle of it. I know a lot of teams in the Big 12 hope that BYU keeps winning. There's a few that don't, like Iowa State, Kansas State, and maybe Colorado. But enjoy it, Greg. Thanks for your time. You do a great job.
Always my pleasure, guys. Thank you. Take care.